Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Harebrained Games. Today we're going to do an unusual list, a list of things that I'm just not a fan of. This is most of the time the lists I've done have been positive. Usually like, hey, top 10 this, top 10 that, best practices, blah, blah, blah. This is a little bit edgy for me. I generally tend, again, to be positive in nature because games are supposed to be fun, and the whole idea of a board gaming hobby is to go play games and enjoy them. At least that's my motivation. But there are some things that I wanted to kind of go over that just kind of accumulated, and I've kept a list over the last couple of years and stuff of things that I'm just not a big fan of, but don't necessarily go to the level of hatred. I don't want to do things I hate and despise. We used to have Tim's Tantrum in my weekend games. It'd be like things that I just don't like and stuff. And I'm like, I can be crabby when I want to. But these are things that just for some reason never have resonated either as a practice or a policy or as an inclusion in a game or etc. These are not things I hate, except one. One of them I put in. But, for example, this isn't going to be really bad rule books. I hate really bad rule books and stuff. But it's things that over time, they're just not things that I'm a fan of. Things that just don't quite go over for me the way they may go over for some people. In a lot of ways, this is very neutral in nature. Like, hey, I don't like these, but maybe some more. The other thing is maybe you can convince me otherwise. Maybe you can be like, well, yeah, I see your point on this one, but if you try this or that, or maybe check this game out, it does it differently, blah, blah, blah. Let's get into it. All right. Top things in board gaming that I am not a fan of. First one, and they're in no particular order, so this isn't best to worst or whatever. I'm not a fan of games that have wildly different modes. That is to say, if a game has, hey, we have a competitive mode, we also have a cooperative mode, and we have a solo mode, and we have a semi-cooperative mode, which is its own kind of thing. I'm not a fan of those. I think one of the ones that was the most egregious on this one was a game called Pathogenesis, which honestly was a fledgling designer, and they thought, well, let's just make it all so that you can have all kinds of different ways to play. And the problem I usually find is that whenever you try to do all these different modes, none of them are ones that really appeal. Maybe one of them appeals, but then I feel like, well, why didn't we just go with that game? Was I robbed of these other modes? And then if they all stink, well, then why did we not just focus on one great mode? I would rather take one great mode over a bunch of secondary modes. And on that, we get to the next thing, and I'm not a fan of solo games that rely on extreme difficulty rather than contoured challenges. This is one where it basically is just brutal. It's like we made this game really, really hard for solo mode because we didn't want people to think it was too easy. Now, there's a lot of cooperative games that could fill in there, but I think there's some solo games that are more specific to like, we just want to run you through the gauntlet and see if you survive. Sometimes it works. There are exceptions. Friday is extremely difficult, but extremely cinematic and really enjoyable, but that's an exception to the rule. But I could be wrong. Maybe there are other solo games that really have incredible difficulty for the sake of difficulty, not just they're difficult and hard to win. Robinson Crusoe, that's a difficult game, but there's a lot of stuff going on, and I feel like you can do a lot of things to make it entertaining. Games are just like, we're just going to pound you right out of the gate. You're not going to, and you if you survive this one time, well, you've done it. Like, you must be a real solo warrior. So there's that. I'm not a big fan of modular expansions. I do not like modular expansions. There, again, are exceptions, but in general, I just struggle with them because they remind me of back in the old days when I was just, LAN parties and playing games like Duke Nukem and the original Quake and, Wolfenstein and stuff. And you'd go to the bookstore or the computer store and be like, this bought 1,000 great levels for Duke Nukem and 1,000 of them suck. And that's kind of how I feel sometimes, that you get these modular expansions, you mix and match. The onus is on me to go mix and match them. I'm not sure which ones I like, which ones I don't, and definitely it's really bad when these expansions don't mix well together. Either mix them all together and work with it, or pull them out. Or if you play with this expansion, you got to pull that expansion out. I hate that because I don't want to have to paradrop surgical expansions into the game and then have to do this military extraction after the game because the next time I might want to use a different set or whatever. I usually end up just going, which ones do I... If I can't throw it all in, I would just pick a couple, put it in, and I never play the rest of them. I just don't like it. To me, modular expansions just don't work. Exception being Merchants and Marauders, which honestly I would play with almost all of the expansions in that one, and because that one is so highly rated by me anyway, this just made it better and better. And I think Titans, there was a Kickstarter called Titans that I think did a good job of, somewhat good job of embracing some modular expansions to it. But in general, I'm like, give me your best, not your most. And that's how I feel about that. Not a fan. Again, none of these are right or wrong. These are things. Except the next one. I hate pizza box size manuals, and I've said that so many times, but it is so tiresome to have to sit there and take a manual the size of a windshield cover and flop it over a majority of the board or the table if we have limited size to be able to go learn it. Also that you could get wonderful negative space and whatever. I want this size. I want to flip through it. I just don't like pizza box size manuals. They're egregious and unnecessary in almost every case, but you can prove me wrong. The other thing I'm not a big fan of, and this may surprise people, is I'm not a big fan of conveyor belt deck builders. Ever since Ascension and even other games that I enjoy it, but I don't like this aspect, but I'll deal with it in order to play it. Legendary series, like, has the conveyor belt. I'm like, alright, I'll put up with it. At least it did something clever with it. But games where you have to grab something from the middle of the table are way less interesting to me than games where you have a discrete set of like Dominion, which I do like. I don't like, especially don't get me having to shift every single turn like Morals. You're like, okay, move the cards over, place it in there, move the cards over, place it in there. Don't give me busy work as part of a conveyor belt. I'm not playing a conveyor belt, I'm playing a game. And so I'm not a big fan of those, even though I found that they have been successful in places. The current Star Wars, the deck building game, actually did some interesting things with making it so every card at least had some value in your deck building. I think there's room to grow, and I might grow to like them, but I'm never going to love conveyor belt deck systems. So anyway, and number 4 is also going to be a surprise. I'm not a big fan of, and this is 100% my fault, wargame books. I love the idea. I absolutely love the idea. I have bought 5, 6 different wargame books. And these are, for those who know, you buy the book, it comes with all the rules, it comes with the map on each page. You literally lay out the book, you set up the pieces, you grab a pen or pencil, you can cover it up or whatever. And everything about these is great. In fact, I think it's a great on-ramp for wargaming for people. It just, there's so many upsides to this, and I'm glad to see that it's gotten great success. My problem is me, because I'm incapable of drawing in the book. I just don't want to do it. I struggle with that mightily. It's just ingrained with me from my youth when you didn't dog-ear pages or whatever. I've gotten better about that, but I just don't like drawing in a book. I don't like the pristine nature of it going away, even though like flipping it and holding like this. And so what I end up doing is I end up blinging these games so much that I might as well just have bought a war game with components. Like, oh, I gotta have units for this. Oh, it's I gotta build little bunkers. I end up adding so many game pieces that I wind up, it's not really a war game book, it's just a book of maps, and then I build this war game on top of it, and then I haven't saved myself any money anyway. So, and this is personal to me. I don't know if anyone else has done that or had that same kind of penchant or tenacity to do that, but that's kind of been my experience and why this is something I'm not a fan of because of me, not because of wargaming books. I think wargaming books are a great new kind of direction, and I hope to see lots and lots more of them, even more refinement and whatever. It's just me. For some reason, I'm not satisfied until I get all the pieces and bling it out to the point I spend as much money as I would on others. So I'm also not a big fan of miniature light experiences of meteor game experiences. And the classic version of that is the Tiny Epic series. Tiny Epic Defenders, Tiny Epic Quest, Tiny Epic Pirates, Tiny Epic Western, whatever. For some reason, or Blitzkrieg, Caesar in 20 Minutes. They're not my favorite because it always ends up being the same thing. I wind up going, this little taste just makes me want to go play the real thing, a bigger version of it. Again, I don't do a lot of like, we only have 20 minutes, let's play this game. I do a lot more of like, if I'm going to do that, there's going to be much more filler level gaming. But in this case, when you've got these games, and they're great games, they're really well done. Like the Tiny Epic series is really cool. You pull it out, you play it, you get the feeling, but then I'm just like, why don't I just go play a meatier version of the game if I have time? I'd rather set up and play that over a series of days than play this for 20 minutes and feel like, that was a nice taste, now give me more. It's just the way I am. It's sort of like these games, yeah, it's just the way I am. So other people would enjoy it, but I generally speaking, if I find a miniature version of a heftier game experience, I'll ask myself first and foremost, why don't I just play the better war experience? So that said, I did buy Tiny Epic Detective or whatever the one coming out is, because that one, I don't know of anything that is meatier that matches up with it. Anyway, what else am I not a fan of? I am not a huge fan of roll and writes, and I have tried really, really hard, and there's no reason why. There's no reason why a roll and write doesn't deserve to exist, just like any other style in board gaming, but for some reason I'm still waiting. I think it comes back to an even deeper thing, which is I don't like the consumable kind of scenarios. I really, really... Consumables for those, like in board gaming, video gaming, whatever, are you grab these potions or you buy these things and then you go use them. You use them and they're done. Basically, life. It's like eating a meal. It's a consumable. In games, for some reason, I've always been driven away against that. I've always wanted something with some permanency. And so, even though there's, like playing games like Diablo 2 or playing any games where you're collecting all these potions, by the time I'm done with finished Diablo 2 or any other open world game where I was collecting stuff that could be consumed, I usually find that 90% of the stuff I collect I don't use because I'm always afraid I might need it for the next even harder encounter. And so I struggle mightily with that over, say, if I get this character trait or this skill or this ability that I just, I use it and then I gotta wait for it to cool down and then use it again. I'm way more doing that. I am always that type of person who's always worried about using something now means screwing myself later when a bigger challenge comes out. And I think that kind of rolls in somewhat indirectly into roll and writes, where I'm like, I don't like I don't drawing on stuff, mapping on stuff. I just don't feel that satisfaction. I just don't, and that's weird because roll and writes. I mean, from growing up playing Yahtzee, I don't know why it hasn't hit me yet. But I have a lot of them. I have a ton of roll and writes, and I try them all out. I'm like, I can see where people would like this, whatever. I haven't delved into Hadrian's Wall, but I did try as a roll and write idea, Twilight Inscription, and it didn't last long. It was fun for a couple games, and then it just kind of faded for me. But that's, again, maybe I'm missing something. If anybody out there is not a fan of roll and writes but found one that was like, but this one takes the cake, love to hear about it. And the others, kind of in similar vein, another thing I'm not a big fan of is one time per use per game scenarios. And this is something where you'll see, this games where you have to choose your own scoring moment, and it's not necessarily like everybody counts up their points. It's sort of that risk. It's interesting. It's sort of like that in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, when Captain Jack comes up to the guy and he's like, if you were waiting for the opportune moment, that was it, and you've missed it, kind of thing. Because I have this constant self-doubt, like, I did that, but man, if I could have waited, or maybe I should have used it earlier. For some reason, I'm always questioning myself as if I'm using it at the right time, where timing becomes an issue when scoring happens. And there's a lot of great games. I just played Rebuilding Seattle. That's another one where it's like you choose the timing of the scoring just right. One of the first games I played that did that was Arcadia, where you're building up this stuff, and at a certain point, you got to figure out when to make your move to get your scoring, because the composition could change and you could basically lose out. I always like getting more, not less. Black Friday, another one by Friedman Freeze, which is a stock market game where you're literally doing that very thing. Like, how high do I go up? If I sell too early, I'm not going to make as much as if I sell at the zenith, but if I wait too long, it's going to tank, and then I'm going to be making nothing. And a lot of people like those games. I do not. And that kind of bleeds into the one time per use. Like, you have one time during the game, you can use this ability, and then you flip it over and it's all done. Several games do that. For some reason, I don't know why I don't like them, but I just don't. Maybe it gets back to the consumable thing, where like, it's mine. I went to use it. Like, I earned it, kind of thing. So, and then another thing I'm not necessarily a fan of is simplistic accumulators. Simplistic accumulators are basically, they can come into play for skill checks. They can come into play for scoring tracks. An example of a skill check would be like Skyrim lately, where it's just like, or some game where you get all of these weapons and equipment and abilities, and all they really do is just add to your dice roll, or add this or add that, and they don't do anything more nuanced than that. If your whole game is geared on that, and all you get is flavor text that leads you to go, this flavor text is meaningless, just how many dice do I get? I've grown old in many ways, and one of the ways that I've grown old and crotchety is just I want something more satisfying. Look at Galaxy Defenders as an example of a game that takes dice and it has things on all the sides of the dice and it can have effects and side effects and stuff like that. That's interesting to me. That's more than like, oh, I've got the, the torch of unknowing. That gives me one less die, but the dice I, roll are sadder. I don't know. Stuff like that. And scoring tracks. An example would be Endless Setup, or I mean Endless Winter, which has these scoring tracks. They're like, okay, maybe you go up, maybe there's a bonus. Terra Mystica is another example of where you've got these scoring tracks. All you're doing is just shuttling points there. You're not really getting much out of it, and that's where I like the Gaia Project, where you have this scoring track, and yes, you're accumulating, but you have these steps, these nice, interesting steps of bonuses that happen as you do that. Gaia Project is not the only thing that does it, but other places that do that, Coimbra, and some others, where if you have a accumulator, but that accumulator does at least branch out into giving you something cool and fun, I'm okay with it. I just not a big fan of anything where it's just simplistic accumulation anymore. Your mileage may vary. And that does bleed into, it's like, again, skills and bonuses that are just more of the same, which is similar to simplistic accumulators, but not entirely. And again, I go back to Skyrim as an example, but there are others where maybe Pathfinder, whatever, where honestly you're not doing a whole lot more than just going, this special bonus, this skill with this awesome name, add more dice, remove a dice, add one to your dice, like I'm just kind of, those just don't do much for me anymore, but convince me otherwise. And then another thing I'm not a big fan of is beat your own score when it's really, really obvious. I want the challenges to seem sentient to me. I want it to seem like I've contested over some great thing, great obstacle, not just, well, did you do better than last time? Did you finish the crossword puzzle in 20 minutes instead of 22 minutes or whatever? And yes, I know that at the end of the day, particularly for solo games, beat your own score is prevalent. Behind the scenes, that's kind of things build up. You're going to, whoever scores the most points wins. But I don't want to see the scaffolding. I want to be pizzazzed. I want smoke and mirrors and things that make it feel like I'm actually having a good time challenging something that's less droll than just, a discrete number. So another thing I'm not a fan of, and again, none of these are wrong, they're just not for me, is I really, really, really have never found a game where I've enjoyed supply rules. You play a lot of board games and you get these supply rules going, and all of them make sense, and all of them are necessary. A lot of them are critical. That's how you avoid having games just go off the rails. But this invisible spectral schoolmarm that's just always waiting to slap you in the wrist with her stick of starvation if you miss even one of her rigid and game-by-game changing talking points is how I feel like supply is like, ugh. All right, we had fun. Now let's go. Eat the broccoli and make sure that and stuff. I really some supply rules are so simple that I shouldn't be complaining about them, but I still feel like, ugh. Check for supply. Make sure it's supplied. Did I remember the supply rules? I just had the dickens of a time trying to remember supply rules. Especially when they have, here's the main thing, but then check these exceptions to the rules and stuff. So for some reason, supply rules are kind of a game within a game that I don't enjoy, but maybe you guys like them. I do agree they're necessary in a lot of games because they're vitally important, particularly if you're reenacting real-life situations where, well, supply is like the unsung hero. So, anyway, another thing I'm not a huge fan of is games that have elongated setups for different player counts. By that I mean, if you're playing solo, rearrange this game entirely. If you're playing 2 players, then set it up this way. If you're playing 3 or more players, set it up this entirely different way. Those kind of wear me down. Seven Wonders is a classic one where I can't even count the amount of times, so we'd sit down to play like a 5-player game of Seven Wonders. We'd get everybody ready, and then a couple people come along and go, can I join? It plays up to 7, and it doesn't take much longer. I'm like, yeah, that's great, except now everyone give me your cards back, and then we go in and we have to shuffle in those cards again. It's not a big deal the first time. It is a big deal about the 17th time. Alma Mater was grossly bad about this. Another game where it's just, depending on your player count, you're like taking, you've got like 6, 7 different pools of things you got to go take cards out and put them in on each different one. And I'm like, ugh. The setup on that one was grotesque anyway. Plains Indian Wars is another one that kind of struggles with that as far as and that one has different rule sets even for the game, so that if you're playing at these player counts, you literally are switching rules, and that got confusing for people. Like, I was playing at 3 and 4 player last night. If you're playing at 2 player, it's this and whatever. If you're playing solo, you don't even have all the pieces in the box. So, great game, but man, like trying to figure out the different rules for different player counts, it was more confusing than it needed to be. And another one is like Jerusalem, which is a brand new game that I really love. But at different player counts, you've got pretty different rules in pretty different setups and configurations. It just takes a lot of time. So, and particularly ones where if you're going to play with 2 players, well, you're going to grab all the components from another player and then go set them up. And I'm like, well, I get it. I mean, it's not an exact science, but I love games where no matter what the player count is, you can really just quickly, smoothly get into play. Not every game can do that, but I appreciate them when they do. The other thing is double-sided, double-purpose tokens and tiles. That is, I have, and I've seen this in a couple GMT games, not all, and then Memoir 44, where you were trying to, there's not a ton of rhyme or reason, but you've got front and back sides both with very different units for very different situations, and you have to try and like look in the front and the back to figure out where people, I mean, if everything's on one side, I can organize it and arrange it in a tray. I can set up like the terrain for Memoir 44, well, the forest is here, the mountains here, whatever. But when you got double-sided terrain and it's not really like, okay, mountains on this side, grass on this side, that gets unwieldy to try to set up too, particularly if you have a longer game. I'm not a fan of those. I understand why. I mean, it cuts down on the amount of tiles, cuts down on weight, cuts down on how much you fill a box. But man, it's tricky. You're like, okay, it's grab all the mountains, look for whichever ones have the bocage. That one doesn't. Not a fan. Another thing I'm not a fan of in the same way as terrain is paper maps. I've never really enjoyed them no matter what. I know, I mean, you can get some heated discussion from some of the old guard that are like, well, you just don't understand or appreciate life in those times. Well, yeah, I do. And I understand why paper maps can be valuable and whatever, but I'll take a mounted game board. It just feels more elegant, and I'm playing a game to enjoy it, so if I can have a chance to get a mounted map, I'm going to do it. It's not a sin to have a paper map. And there are exceptions. Last 100 Yards is a great example of a game because it had these placards, and they were cardboard enough. They weren't just like flapping sheets. They were cardboard. But because they did that, they were able to include many more maps of these little tactical areas than they would be if they tried to get big boards. And so it makes sense. And the other thing that mitigates it is I grabbed this nice big glass sheet, and then so you put the map down, then you put the glass sheet down, and it helps. It helps a lot. And so that's one thing that I'm a fan of doing. So, although definitely don't ever let the glass sheet fall on your toes. Ouch, that hurt. Anyway, other things I'm not really a fan of: zombies. Never gotten into the zombie thing. I just don't like them. I don't know why. They just don't do anything for me. The shows or that, don't know. One exception, as always, zombie dice, which honestly could be, they have space dice and a bunch of other stuff, alien dice, and Australia, because Australia had a really great game set up and situation, and the zombies and the like Cthulhu kind of thing. Well, it's not really zombies, it's more like Cthulhu, but you could lump zombies and Cthulhu in the same. I'm just not a fan of the topic, but Australia was so much more that it really impressed me in a great, great thing. What are some other things? And this is getting long in the tooth, isn't it? So, negative spirals. Games that start out where you're in great shape and then everything goes downhill and you have to survive as long as you can. Nothing wrong with that. That's life. But at the same time, I'm not a big fan of that situation. I prefer the other. For example, an example of that would be Robinson Crusoe, where you start off in the most pessimal of situations and it's your job to work your way out of it. Like Friday, or that. Whereas First Martians, the successor, starts off and things are great, and then things just erode and go off the rails, and you're just trying to like survive. For some reason, I don't like that. I like things that go upbeat, not downforce. So, co-op tower defense games. I'm still trying to get a hold of a co-op kind of tower defense game that I really, really enjoy rather than like. I like Castle Panic. I like the Forbidden Islands. I like the Pandemics. The simple back and forth, but I always feel like at the end of the game I was just plugging holes in the dike and letting random cards jab, right hook. Ugh. survive, jab, jab, right hook, survive. I've always felt like I've always been more like, how can I go on the offense? How can I get back at these? How can I go on the prowl? So again, a huge segment of the populace love that. They love that. We can survive as long as we can. I've just never been an Alamo kind of person. So sorry, Crockett and Tubbs. All right, and number next, whatever that is. I've never been a fan of crazy difficulty with low odds of success, or stressful games that stress me out in that regard. There's a lot of games where you have dice and then a lot of mitigators, Nemo's War, etc. Which I think does a great job of helping give you all the tools you need to try to mitigate the dice, so that there's a just kind of a buffer of like making it or not. And then there's games like Hostage Negotiator, Dark Souls, Final Girl, where you're just pummeled from the start. Some people really like that. They're just like, they galvanize themselves to like go, take on these mighty forces. I'm more like, I like this smooth contoured leveling curve where I can feel like I'm making progress, and at least I had a chance and it wasn't just me getting hit again. Jab, jab, right hook. Another thing I'm not a fan of are Kickstarters that don't provide really clear delineation of what expansions and additions go where. That's a case where you have stretch goals, and there are games that I really, really love that do this very poorly, where because these stretch goals, and then you suddenly get all these stretch goals, but they didn't really think through how to make clear what goes where, what gets added, what doesn't, what's in the base game, what's not, how do I mix this in, when do I mix this in. I mean, you end up leaving me playing Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the agitated person edition, rather than being able to go and get into your game and be able to really just start playing it and enjoying it. So examples of this are Titans. Even though I love Titans' modular system, I didn't like the fact that it left me going, what goes where, what fits in, especially when the rulebook kind of blends in between expansion and not, and you're left going, what? Other game, Great Wall. Great Wall was another example where I'm like, this is overwhelming to me. And then Hogs of War, one of the greatest games of 2022. Same thing. In the end, I just threw everything together and played with it and had a good time. So, yeah, don't leave me with unexplained components. Give me instructions for components about what's in the retail game, what's in the base game, what's not. Just tell me what it is that I'm trying to do here and where. So. Anyway, another thing is expansions in Ziploc bags. I do not like them. I don't care. I just have an aversion to Ziploc bags in general and storing important things in them. Growing up, we were really, really poor, and so we didn't get a chance to really do a lot with lunch boxes, and so a friend gave me like we would get store bags and we would get non-Ziploc bags, and then we would get Ziploc bags inside the store bag. So I mean, I remember a time a friend gave me a lunch box because he got a Star Wars one, and I ended up with one. It was like peachy, or like, I don't know, like it wasn't the Holly Hobby one. My sister got that one, but we were just on cloud nine. We got lunch boxes, and so maybe it harkens back to that, or maybe I just like the idea if I buy an expansion to get a nice box. Again, totally understandable. I have many great expansions that come in Ziploc bags, but if I had the choice not to, I'd definitely take the ones not in Zippies. The other thing is not being able to fit everything into a single box with all of the expansions. And I understand that this gets tricky again. I'm not a fan of anything because I'm freaky. I'm odd. I don't like having multiple boxes to bring the things. I would rather have a single box and a way to pack everything in, even if it's snug. But if it's overwhelmingly wrong, then that's bad. I've taken to actually buying boxes, like wood boxes, and doctoring them and then putting for example, Space Empires from GMT, all three of the expansions in a single box, and making it kind of a bit of a train case. I never thought I'd do that, but I actually do that, and that's part of it's relatively new thing where I really am running out of space, and believe me, I have a lot of space, which shows you I have too many games. Too many. And the other thing is there's games that try to be really small in footprint, when I really would have appreciated a bigger box because of it. Some people, they really want the most compact. I don't. Pax Porfiriana is an example. of a game that just stuffs everything in there, and then I don't get a chance to organize. You're just literally stuffing everything into a square box the size of a Whitman sampler. And I definitely preferred PAX Renaissance because it came with a full-size box and some breathing room to be able to organize. And again, I've compromised over years. I've gotten, my nitpickiness has been compromised as I rebox and rehome these games, because honestly, most of these I probably will never sell. I mean, if it was a collector's item, I probably wouldn't. But I mean, if I can get a nice pine box and organize a game and be able to play it, I'm going to do that. And don't get me started on selling big boxes. That's a living eye roll to me. Like, especially at the cost. Like, I get it, but man, blah. Anyway. Another thing I'm not a big fan of is crapshoot choice points or random events or blind choices. Tower defense games do this a lot, where you are asked to prepare for the unknown. I don't like preparing for the unknown. To me, it's just rock, paper, scissors, where it doesn't matter. My brain might as well set my brain off for the night and play bunco at that point. Games have gotten better about this, but in general, it's like Kingsburg is an example where honestly you don't know well enough to predict when the barbarians are coming, what they're going to be, how strong they're going to be. You kind of have to just take a risk, but those risks could be taken and cost you or not, and it's not fun to me to take blind risks. I like to take partially informed risks. After the Empire is one of the few tower defense games that I think does it and hits it out of the park. It's an exception to the rule because you get partial insight. It at least lets you predict an approximation of what you're going to contend with, so you can prepare for it. There might be a few extra things coming along that you didn't count on, but at least you're preparing for the bulk of what you could possibly end up facing. And so, yeah, so that's an example of that. The other thing I'm not a big fan of are variants, official or otherwise. I rarely employ a variant. I'm more of a sort of a framework person where it's like you want the best of what someone can give you. You want to know that someone or some group vetted and did their best job of making a game, and if it really needs a variant, then I generally don't have a chance of utilizing it or playing it. Now, it may change someday. I may find that there's some variants that make life better, but in general, I try and avoid variants. Nothing wrong with them, absolutely nothing wrong with them, just not a fan. The other thing is I'm not a big fan of icon dependence in games. I know it's a necessity because localization, internationalization, where you're like, we can put this game out for any number of people and it will be absolutely fine. We don't have to worry about translation or whatever. But they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but as far as board games, a picture is worth 1/10,000th of a word to me, as far as being able to remember. Because in the moment, sure, you can use your short-term memory, your RAM cache to go learn the icons you need to figure stuff out. But long-term, it's an inhibitor to long-term play. Here's an example: Roma, Stefan Feld game, came out all iconic, and every time I would go back to it, and sometimes it would take a month or two in between, or you go back to or whatever, and it'd be like you're having to relearn stuff again. Where if it just said in your language what it was with the icon, be like, yep, I got that. A few words and I got that. Roma 2 came out, and Roma 2 still gets played because I can pull it out, give it to people, and I don't have to have everybody looking up the cheat sheet again for what the icons mean because it's got the English words, and then they go, okay, yeah, I remember that. I get that. You give people the tools that they can use to self relearn. So anyway, another thing, I'm not a fan of complete redos of games that I decide not to back or buy. Now let me phrase that. I have this tendency, and it's something I have to work on, and maybe it is like, oh, well, if there's a new version of this, then the old version is just not, for some reason, I just don't feel like I want to play it anymore, and that's a stupid thing for me to think, because, what's wrong with the game in here? Just because someone came out with a much fancier version with it all together doesn't mean this is not valuable anymore, but there's a part of me that has to struggle really hard, to get past that and just go like, hey, what you have is good enough. So, and that's not a game flaw, that's a character flaw, really. And generally, either I go all in and get the new version and just sell off the previous version, which I've done several times, Clash of Cultures, Russian Railroads, or I just kind of leave it on the shelf, go, whatever. So So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not a big fan of me, and when it comes to like not feeling good enough when a game just has a new version out there I don't have yet. It's silly, isn't it? Another thing I'm not a big fan of is using the box as part of the game. I know that it's clever. I know, like rattle, battle, grab the loot. What was that? There's Warriors or yeah, not the Warriors game. There's another game that comes out where you basically use the board itself. Even at one of the Tiny Epic Adventures does that. Use the box itself as part of the game. Just never really liked that much. It's just weird. Like, I don't know, but like I don't like that repurposing. But again, nothing wrong with it. Um, I do have one last one that I'm not a fan of, but that's just because I recently saw it. But have you ever seen that books that are written by people on books on how to make board games by people you've never heard of and that have no industry experience? Not a big fan of that. I just there was a how to make a board game that came out recently from some I'm an award-winning blah blah blah, and I look and I'm like, I don't know any of your games. They're barely on Board Game Geek at all, and yet you have these ideas. I'm like, maybe your ideas are great, but maybe I think I would rather read a book from someone who I could instantly understand. For example, in the computer gaming industry, like having played Sid Meier's games for decades, when he came out with his sort of like 4 decades of gaming biography, it was an easy sell and an awesome read because you get a lot of behind the scenes information from a guy who literally created the iconic video games that I grew up with. So anyway, now I've got a small segment before we go where I talk about things that you might think I would not be a fan of, but for some reason I don't mind. And the first off is paper money. I don't mind it. I really don't. And I'm not just talking the Millennium Blades clever, like, big stacks of money. I'm talking paper money. I don't see an issue. I really like it. I think Lords of Vegas used it in the past. Was the most recent game in a long time that has paper money. A lot of times paper money is indicative of poor design because usually the people are from Monopoly land from 30 years ago, and so they make these cheesy games with paper money, and that paper money is indicative of a bad game, but the paper money itself doesn't bother me. I don't mind at all. Like, in some ways it's kind of fun, and I think people like the idea of creating money, so I don't mind larger boxes with lots of air. I know a lot of games get this, like, why couldn't you just have put it in a small box? I mean, I of all people could make the argument that, yeah, smaller game boxes might be beneficial to me. But I don't mind them because I don't mind the fact that they expand. When I go on trips, I don't mind the fact that I can put 2 or 3 games into a game box. The Splendor box, literally, I mean, people take pictures and they show, like, oh, it's only 1/8 of this corner. I'm like, that's fine, whatever. I certainly got my joy out of it, and it wasn't because I just stared at the pieces. I enjoyed the game, and if the game fits in a reasonably sized, a standard box, like the size of a book, whatever, I don't mind. And a lot of people are surprised that I'm not bothered by that at all. If anything, it helps when expansion times come too. I don't mind like really non-obvious mistakes if the publisher and designer has a presence that's prevalent and a humility to be able to address them. By that I mean, there are times when I look at rule books or games or manuals and stuff, and I go like, how did this possibly get through? This is so egregiously wrong and glaring that this is just silly. But a lot of times when you're into the wargaming and board gaming, where you start getting down into nuanced, real, just tiny, tiny things like mistakes, that happen, like, oh, this example on this page, oh, we forgot to update the whatever. I'm very patient about that because when you look at the overwhelming scope of complexity of building a game and just having rewritten a rule book back in January for a company just to kind of like get my feet in the waters, I have great respect for it, and I have a lot of patience. So it doesn't bother me if I see a non-obvious mistake and the publisher or designer are there and active in the forums and the groups and the whatever to be able to go, yep, let's just, cool, no problem. There are examples of games that are so bad, that have so many of those, that even though the designer's a nice person, they still kind of push the limits of my patience. And stickers, finally, stickers. I actually really like and get a kick out of putting stickers on games. Even though it's tricky, some of the stickers are tricky, there's kind of like this, and I have like a pathetic ability to actually make everyone darn perfect. But there's kind of a zen to it. I don't actually mind when a game comes with stickers and I have to put stickers on. Like, I really don't mind. Example is Command and Conquer Samurai, which those were squares. That was easy. Banish the Snakes. That was easy. Terror in Meeple City. That took some time. Village, I think, had a couple places where you put little stickers on. And finally, Jerusalem was the most recent one, and that was like hours of stickering. I know a lot of people really hate that, and they're like, retire that. But for some reason, I find it really kind of pleasant. So, anyway, that's it for this long, long list of things I'm just not a fan of. Don't necessarily hate, just not a fan of. What about you guys? What are some things that you don't necessarily hate, but are also like, yeah, I could see that particular thing retired and never seen again, and I'd still be happy. So, anyway, that's it for today. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Harebrained Games.